Yeah, Pepe, here we are, back in the ABC. The whole place has fallen to bits. They've let us back in the building, or we have hacked the security codes. I'm not going to tell you which one. It is Pep. It was time to come back, Dave, wasn't it?
It was time to come back, yes.
I'm sorry, this is Dr. Dave Smith. I should introduce Dr. Dave
Yes.
Smith to tell the three people who are keen for us to come back.
Yes.
Who you are.
So I'm an associate professor at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. I'll just mention from the outset of this PEP season that nothing I say represents the views of either the United States Studies Centre or the University of Sydney. What you're getting here is 100% me.
And nothing I say represents my actual view. I only speak for the ABC. No.
Now that we've got that out of the way.
No. Okay, so let's get right into it. As Dave said, this is a new season. We're going for about 3 months, I would say.
Yep.
We'll go through the timeline at another date. We've got so much to talk about. We've got 9 months to talk about, so let's get straight into it.
Yes.
We're going to leave a few things out from this 9 months, but one thing we cannot leave out. Let's just start from scratch.
Yep.
With the biggest story, I think, that we missed,
Absolutely.
which was Dobbs. Dave, take it away.
Yes. So this was the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. One of the reasons why I would agree with Chaz that it's the biggest story of the last 9 months is because that was a surprise. We fully expected that the Supreme Court would hack away at Roe versus Wade. I was expecting them to get rid of the Casey standard in abortion, which established viability as the boundary between state regulation and abortion. But no, they actually got rid of the entirety of Roe versus Wade. And Samuel Alito made it very clear in his decision. He said the whole reasoning behind the whole decision was wrong, which opens the door for a revision of other decisions that were based on an implied constitutional right to privacy, including Griswold versus Connecticut from, I think it was 1960, that guarantees the right to birth control, including Lawrence versus Texas in 2003, which struck down anti-homosexuality laws, and, of course, Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015, which guaranteed same-sex marriage.
Now, I should say at this point in time that a lot of the left were making that point at the time when the ruling came down, and then,
Yes.
then a lot of the right said, "Hang on, come on."
Yeah.
Well, the Supreme Court is not going to make gay marriage illegal again. It's not going to make gay sex illegal again. It's not going to make contraception illegal again. Don't be ridiculous. Kavanaugh doesn't want to do that. Gorsuch definitely doesn't want to do that. Gorsuch was the person who wrote the ruling that expanded the rights of gay and transgender people only a year ago. He's not going to do that. That's all very well, but obviously the Supreme Court can change.
Exactly.
The makeup of the Supreme Court can change, and they have someone on the Supreme Court right now, in
Yes.
Clarence Thomas, who said, "No, that's exactly what I want to
Yes.
do."
Yeah,
In his verdict, that's what he said.
And Clarence Thomas is the leader of the right of the Supreme Court. So it's entirely plausible to me that one of these issues, admittedly, I think it's same-sex marriage is the most plausible issue, could come up before the Supreme Court. And all of a sudden, it turns out that some of these justices are actually open to it because as it was either Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski very bitterly pointed out, in closed-door sessions with the senators before the nomination of a couple of these judges, they had sworn that they would not overturn Roe versus Wade, but it happened anyway. So I think they're right to be skeptical about the idea that this isn't going to extend any further. Certainly, Congress then took the step of the House of Representatives passing was it called the Dignity of Marriage Act or it was something like that guaranteed the right to both same-sex marriage and interracial marriage. Interracial marriage was probably not one of the things that was threatened by that, but it was very useful symbolically to have it there. And that attracted 49 Republican votes in the House, which is pretty remarkable. That was a lot more than anyone expected. I think a lot of those were people who are getting increasingly nervous about the midterm election, but it's also a lot of people that was a conviction vote. But anyway, getting back to the Dobbs decision itself. So completely tearing down Roe versus Wade. What has become apparent was that this happened before the pro-life movement was actually ready for it. They might have thought they were ready for it, but politically they were not. So the pro-life movement politically for decades has been taking a very incremental approach precisely because they're aware of where public opinion actually stands on this issue, which was behind the Roe versus Wade consensus. And instead, they've been chipping away at the edges, trying to get increasingly sort of restrictive mandates against abortion without actually outlawing it outright, but very effectively in some cases, I would say horribly effectively, making abortion almost impossible in some states.
Which I might add is, like you said, exactly what you expected the Supreme Court to continue with. And in fact, Justice Roberts tried to do that.
That is exactly what Justice Roberts was trying to do. Yeah. Without banning abortion outright, you can make it very difficult to get it. If you sincerely believe that abortion is such a terrible thing that it just shouldn't be happening, in Mississippi, they practically stopped it through a whole raft of terrible measures. I mean, in Texas, they had really significantly restricted it. But going for the outright ban, this, instead of, that was basically a signal to drop this whole incremental approach and basically go for the prize, right? This is what they had been promised by Trump. And so not only did you have trigger laws in state legislatures that were just waiting to go, but you had state legislators just going for the most extreme bans possible, not having any exemptions in some states for rape or incest, which is something that is supported by, I mean, exemptions for rape and incest are supported by a supermajority of Americans. Yes. So in some cases, outright bans, so not even the Texas-style 6-week ban, but, complete bans, very few or no exemptions. When Indiana's law passed, there were some legislators who were really annoyed that it actually included exemptions for ectopic pregnancy, which is pregnancy that actually threatens the life of the mother. So just these really extreme positions. And
we should say on that note that today, as we record this podcast, there is a trigger law going to effect in Texas, which bans all abortions except for those that would harm the mother.
Right, yeah.
That's it. So no rape or incest.
No rape or incest exemptions. In Louisiana, you even had legislators talking about making abortion homicide. That I don't think got out of committee, but I mean, this is the sort of extremism that we're talking about. Now, the effect of all this is that what Americans are seeing now is a very stark choice between abortion being legal or illegal. The pro-life side is never going to win that argument. And we saw that in Kansas. Kansas is a deep red state. It's not the deepest red state, but it's a deep red state. It's a one with a history of anti-abortion extremism in the state, resulting in murder in some cases. And they had a state Supreme Court case in 2019 which found that there was a right embedded in the Kansas Constitution to an abortion. So they had a referendum held at the same time as the primaries about whether to keep that right, and 58% of the state voted to keep it.
58 to 40. So
58 to 40,
18% margin in a place which has a lot more than 40% Republicans.
It went for Trump by 15 points. Now, I wasn't surprised that a majority went to keep that. I was surprised by by the size of the margin, but I wasn't surprised by that. I think there's only a handful of states where if the question was basically presented in that way, that you wouldn't get the same result. Now, pro-choice advocates complained in Kansas that the whole situation was basically misunderstood by voters, that it became this binary choice between do you want it legal or do you want it illegal, where they're saying what this question was actually about is should the state legislature be allowed to make restrictions, which is why they were very sneakily framing it as it's about choice. But the thing is that by that point, Kansas voters, like all other American voters, had seen all of these wild laws going into effect in deep red states, and they had surmised this is a choice between legality and illegality. And there had been legislators in Kansas as early as December last year talking about implementing outright bans. So it was not an unreasonable inference for them to vote for legality.
And it's interesting that the percentage was 58% in that vote because directly after the Dobbs decision, 58% in an NBC poll federally said they opposed the decision.
Yes.
And that seems to be the number. 58, 59 seems to be the number. Pro-choice people, people who identified themselves as pro-choice, that's always been basically around the high 40s, 50% in America. That jumped from 49 to 55 overnight.
Yes.
According to Gallup.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that this has happened, as I said, it happened without the pro-life movement actually being ready for it, even if they thought they were. Because the way that they have always liked to frame this is that this is about reducing abortions against the extremism of the other side, which is about allowing abortions under all circumstances, allowing late-term abortions, abortion on demand, blah, blah, blah. Instead, what it is this is about legality or illegality. And the pro-choice side is always going to win that, even in places like Kansas. Now, there's been a lot of speculation since then about the effect that this could have on the midterm elections.
Yeah, and we'll talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. And people are looking at these examples of the very recent election in New York.
New York 19.
The 19th district.
We will get to that.
For me, the jury is still out on how important this is going to be in the midterms, but I think it's fair to say it's going to be far more important than is comfortable for Republicans.
Before we talk about the politics of it, because we definitely will talk more about the politics of it, I want to take a step back a little bit. I'm not going to go into the details of the case. You know, if we were doing this podcast the day it came out, I would spend half an hour reading quotes from the case.
Yes, but, it would have been a legal odyssey.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that now. But all I will say is about the case. All I'll say is that for those who have listened to this podcast for a long period of time, you know my view on the legalities of abortion, which is I never liked Roe versus Wade as a case by itself.
Yeah.
I liked the outcome of abortion being legal.
Yeah.
But the actual, the logic of Roe versus Wade, I never liked.
Which makes you very similar to Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yes,
That was her position on it as well.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Having said that, I thought that so I have a certain sympathy to people looking at Roe versus Wade and going, this doesn't make much sense to me. But I have no sympathy at all with the Supreme Court reinterpreting history, which is what they did.
That is exactly what they did.
And just completely rewrote history in a stupid way to suggest that the entirety of history was pro-life clearly. And so therefore that is why they could just completely ignore Roe versus Wade. That's not how the law works. And that was bullshit. And I don't support that at all. I should say though, that to me, it's an interesting, it's a much closer run argument about whether you believe that abortion should be a fundamental right or whether it should be a legislative issue.
Right.
Like whether it be the states or federal. There's been a lot of focus on the states, but I feel like people are ignoring the fact that the states are irrelevant if the federal government passes legislation.
Yes.
You can have as many ridiculous laws as you like in Mississippi.
Yeah.
But if the federal government passes an abortion rights bill, then that takes precedent.
Yeah.
And there's no suggestion that I know of that the federal government doesn't have the right to do that.
No.
So as we speak right now, this is the issue.
And I think there's another thing worth mentioning here. And I come back to, Ross Douthat from the New York Times, who's one of their in-house conservative columnists and is one of the most thoughtful pro-life columnists you'll come across in terms of the way that he makes the argument. He does hope for a day when abortion is illegal across the United States, but when child rearing is basically far more supported than it is now. And, but, he said, well, look, this is, the Supreme Court is posing what should be the federal solution. Just people in different states have different views on this, and so they should have different laws. But the thing about this issue is it's always going to become nationalized because as soon as states started passing these wild laws, they started looking around for ways of stopping people from leaving their states to get abortion, of stopping medical means of abortion from coming into their state. So whether they like it or not, this was always going to be nationalized. And what's happened is, as I said, it's been nationalized before the pro-life movement was actually ready for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to just very briefly take you guys through the two bills that are vying for recognition at the moment.
Yes.
Because this is where it's at right now. There's the Reproductive Freedom for All Act, which is sponsored. This is the Conservative bill, essentially. It's sponsored by Tim Kaine, Kirsten Sinema, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. It codifies the law as it existed before Dobbs.
Yeah.
So basically, it codifies the undue burden. Bans states from imposing an undue burden on abortion before fetal viability. Fetal viability not determined by the state, determined by the woman's doctor. That's important.
Yes.
So they can't play funny, silly buggers with the number of weeks.
Yes.
Right? But as Dave said before, states were finding a lot of ways to use to exploit the undue burden test to introduce all kinds of minor restrictions that add up over time. They accumulate to become a big pain in the ass.
A classic example of that is, I can't remember whether it was Mississippi or Louisiana, said doctors who perform abortions have to have hospital visiting rights in the state.
Yes.
That was Mississippi. Almost completely knocked out abortion in Mississippi.
The Reproductive Freedom for All Act also guarantees the right to contraception, and it also allows healthcare workers to refuse to provide abortion for religious reasons. That's a concession on the other side of the debate. The left of the Democrats aren't a big fan of that, but the fact is it doesn't have 60 votes anyway.
Absolutely
It has at best 52 votes at the moment.
Yeah.
The alternative is the Women's Health Protection Act, which is what's being advocated by the left. That basically removes the last few decades of gradual loss of abortion rights and goes back to an earlier, about 20 years ago. States can't make patients jump through hoops to get an abortion unless they can prove the step advances the safety of abortion services or health of the woman, and that safety advance can't be achieved through less restrictive means. And also, it guarantees the right at any stage of pregnancy to get an abortion if a provider determines the pregnancy risks the patient's life or health. Health includes mental health.
Yep.
So in reality, that's basically that's going to be anyone essentially. Now Tim Kaine and Kirsten Sinema support that.
Yep.
Collins and Murkowski do not. Importantly, Manchin does not.
Yeah.
So 49 votes.
Yeah.
Okay. So realistically speaking, the only one they're going to get through is the first one.
Yes.
If it isn't obvious, I'm passionately advocating that they pass that because it's better than nothing. And you might go, well, they can't pass it because the filibuster. They're not going to get 60 votes. Well, I think this is where you break the filibuster. This is where you get rid of the filibuster. And the reason why is because I promise you, as soon as abortion becomes a federal legislative issue, the Republicans will get rid of the filibuster to pass a law.
Yes.
They're guaranteed to do it. It's going to happen now. That as soon as the Supreme Court made that decision, it guaranteed the filibuster was absolutely going to go the next time the Republicans have unified Congress and presidency.
Yeah.
So you might as well get rid of it now because it's gone. It's gone in 2025 unless something amazing happens. So
there you go. You heard it on PEP first.
Yeah. So
the filibuster is gone.
It's gone. So you might as well get rid of it now to at least put down a moderate law, which will be very difficult for Republicans to overturn. Like, I'd love to see Republicans try and get that law voted down.
Yeah.
Like, if they did, they would lose the next election by a mile. It would be destruction.
Yeah.
And they know it, so they won't.
Yes.
So that will guarantee to overrule all those stupid laws in Mississippi and Kentucky and all the rest of it. So that would be my suggestion. We'll see what happens.
Yes.
I don't think it's going to happen. But, but we will see.
Congress has a long history of not following Chaz's suggestions.
They never listen to me.
As sensible as they are.
I know that they watch PEP, but they just don't listen to my advice. Okay, should we talk politics a little bit on this then?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The poll I saw recently, which I thought was very instructive, and it leads directly to New York 19.
Yes.
Is from Pew. This came out this week. 40% of Republicans said abortion was a very important issue for them back in March. 46% of Democrats said abortion was a very important issue for them back in March. Now, remember, back in March, we knew that Dobbs was probably coming. It was leaked.
Yes.
But it wasn't for sure.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
In August, 41% of Republicans said it was a very important issue for them, up from 40%.
Yep.
76% of Democrats say it was a very important issue for them, up from 46%. So
Yeah.
now, so there's a big swing towards Democrats. Also, while we're at it, Supreme Court appointments have gone as a very important issue from 55% for Republicans to 48%
Yes.
in the same period. Democrats went from 59% to 69%.
Yes.
So this issue is energizing Democrats, not Republicans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different ways that you can explain that. I'm going to turn to prospect theory
Okay.
as one of the ways of explaining it. Now, some peppers might know this is a theory that is one of the foundations of behavioral economics. It's a psychological theory that humans tend to be particularly loss averse. Okay. And one of the implications of being fundamentally loss averse creatures is that we will fight harder and risk more to get back something that we have lost than for gains in the future of something that we've never had. And there were a whole lot of experiments done by the pioneers of prospect theory around giving people money and taking away money and coin flips and all kinds of stuff. You can read about it on Wikipedia, but it was basically finding that even if the amount of a gain of something that you'd never had was the same or greater than the amount of a loss of something that you have had, you're going to fight harder for that loss. You're going to risk more for that loss. And I do think that we see this manifesting itself a lot in politics and international relations. And I think that this is the prime example of it, especially as this was something that Democrats and liberals and pro-choice people did not expect to lose. Right. So at the moment, they're in a position of feeling this really intense sense of loss. Whereas on the other side, they're suddenly in this position that in their lifetimes they'd never been in before. Right. Most of the people on this side wouldn't really have much memory of 50 years ago of what it was like before then. So another way of looking at it is this is the proverbial dog that caught the car.
Yeah.
Right. So for the pro-life side, the struggle for this was a very animating thing. But now they've got what they want. It's nowhere near as animating. So I think it was entirely predictable that this was actually going to motivate the pro-choice side far more than it would motivate the pro-life side.
And I'm going to take your prospect theory and
Yes.
I'm going to put a stat on top of it, a poll on top of it,
Yeah.
or kind of, which is from Target Smart data. They analyze voter registration in various states. And interestingly, because of course the people who have something to really lose are women.
Yeah.
and they noticed that the states in recent times, in the last few months, where voter registrations have a massive gender gap,
Yes.
are not the blue states, they're the red states. Idaho, there's an 18% gender gap in registrations in the last few months. Wisconsin, which has a red Republican legislature, 17%. Louisiana, 13%. Pennsylvania, 12%. Ohio, 11%. Missouri, 10%. Colorado, 10%. Basically, places where they feel their rights are actually legitimately under threat.
Yes.
Is where there's a gender gap in registration. But the state with the greatest gender gap in the country is the state that actually voted on it. The one state that voted on it, Kentucky, 40% gender gap.
You mean Kansas?
Oh, I'm an idiot. No, I mean Kentucky. I forgot they weren't the ones that voted on it.
Oh,
But,
okay.
it's a big red state.
Yes.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yes.
It's still red. My point still stands.
Yes.
Just doesn't stand quite as well as I thought it did
Right.
when I was being dyslexic a second ago. But there's a 40% gender gap in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So
Which is insane.
huge.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And okay, I'm probably over academicizing it, bringing prospect theory.
Oh, I love it. I love it, though.
Into it. Given that, given that the kind of visceral response that people have had, because this is a basic right being taken away, and anybody could see this. You know who realized that this was going to happen? Donald Trump.
That's right, back in 2016.
Donald Trump was reportedly quite disturbed by, even though he was publicly celebrating this rule, even though he had been promising Republicans exactly that this was going to happen, he was reportedly pretty disturbed.
Just now.
When the Dobbs decision happened in 2022, because he thought that it would jeopardize Republicans' chances in the midterms. Now, you could be a bit more cynical and say he knew that it would take attention away from himself for a period of possibly weeks, but I think anyone could see that this kind of asymmetry was going to develop.
Okay, now let's talk New York 19. We're going to come back to the primaries a little bit later on as well, because there's other primaries apart from New York 19. But New York 19 is the example which people are using right now to illustrate what you're talking about.
Right now.
New York 19 is a special election, so it wasn't a primary. It was a replacement. So it was a Democrat running against a Republican. The Republican was not a crazy dingbat.
Not at all.
He was a relatively moderate Republican. Who, by the way, is not 100% pro-life either.
No. And he was the Dutchess County executive. Just a note on that. Why is Dutchess County in New York spelt with a T? Like as in Dutch, the nationality with S on it? Last time I saw that done was Fergie's 2006 album, The Duchess. Anyway, so sorry, we don't need to dwell on that. But anyway,
I have no answers. I can't
great when a spelling mistake makes its way into a county. It's probably named after someone, to be fair. Anyway,
probably. Anyway, Mark Molinaro is his name, the Republican, not an extremist at all. Pat Ryan, the Democrat running against him, basically ran on abortion.
Yep.
Like all his ads were about abortion, and it was. You hear New York, you think, oh, it must be a very blue district. No. Republican +3. So it's 3 points to the Republicans, lean district. Trump won it against Clinton by 7 points.
Yeah.
Like he won 51-44. Biden did win it, 50-48.
Yes.
But the Biden did quite well amongst those moderate kind of electorates. Pat Ryan ended up winning 51-48. By the way, not a single poll suggested he was going to win. It came through at the end.
Yes, yeah.
Also, importantly, two things. The Democrat areas in New York 19 way overperformed.
Yep.
The two biggest Democrat-leaning counties in the election, which are Ulster and Dutchess, with a T, they account for 42% of the total votes in the district, whereas they only account for 36% of the votes in the 2020 election. Equally, the Republican districts got less support. And I'll quote David Wasserman here, who's an election watcher par excellence. Lots of focus on Dems being more engaged, energetic post-Dobbs, which is undeniably true. But to me, the GOP Trump base appears less engaged than it was last November, which is just as big a part of the story, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I always wondered about these midterms that would Republicans have the problem that when Trump is not on the ballot, a certain portion of his base just doesn't turn out. But for Democrats, Trump is always on the ballot.
It's true.
Whether he's there or not. So, I mean, there was always a bit of a danger of that asymmetry in the first place. The Supreme Court dumping Dobbs on top of that, I think it actually has had a significant effect.
I should also say that there have been 6 special elections since June, and 2 of them were before Dobbs, 4 of them were after Dobbs.
Yep.
According to Harry Anton, Dems are running, depends on which numbers you crunch, Dems were running 6 points worse than Biden before Dobbs in those 2 special elections.
Yep.
Since then, they've been running 5 points better than Biden.
Yeah.
Just across Dobbs. And some of those were like a week on either side. So it was quite stark. 538 has...
I'm still never gone back there.
They have different numbers, but similar margins. They went from R+2 before Dobbs for those special elections to D+9 after Dobbs. But basically, it's about 10-point turnaround.
Yeah, now it's not a huge sample of special elections. So in frequentist statistical terms, you can't make many inferences.
Of course.
But in Bayesian statistical terms, you absolutely can.
Well, and also special elections, I've often poo-pooed them in the past when people use them because they're clearly biased to high information voters.
Yes.
Like people who are really, really, really into it. They vote in special elections. But the fact is that the Democrat base is increasingly becoming the highly educated people.
Yes.
And so if the Democrat base is responding in a special election, you know who else you know what other elections appeal to highly informed, educated and engaged people? Midterms.
Yes.
So as an indicator for midterms, as opposed to presidential elections,
Yes.
I think they're better.
Yes.
Now, I'm not at all suggesting Democrats are going to win the House in November. But what I'm saying is, I
Still
think
a very long shot.
I think that there is, and we'll get to that.
It's going to
as
be
well.
way closer than it should have been.
Yeah. But I think there is something going on.
If you'd
here
asked me
very
at the
least.
start of the year, what is the outcome of the midterm elections going to be, I would have said Republicans by 30 or 40 seats.
Yeah, it was going to be
It doesn't look like, it could still be that, but it doesn't look very much like that anymore. I do remember a few weeks before Dobbs, Henry Olsen in the Washington Post, who's one of their in-house conservative columnists, another one of these very sort of thoughtful conservatives, and I'm sure he wasn't responsible for the headline, but the headline now looks unfortunate. He said, "The red wave is coming in November and there is nothing that Democrats can do about it." Now, it was true there was nothing that Democrats could do about it, but there was a hell of a lot that Republicans could do about it.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say about abortion before we move on?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right. Look, I think it's time for something which everyone's been waiting for. They've been waiting 9 months for. And that is...
Stats Nugget.
Stats Nugget. I totally forgot everything goes. Anyway, but you heard it. You heard it. That's the important bit. This is a great one. I saw this just yesterday.
Yeah.
This is one of those studies that has its own website.
Right,
You know
yes.
those ones?
Yes, yeah.
You're never quite sure how good they are.
Yeah.
So maybe take it with a pinch of salt, but it's just so good, I just had to bring it to you. What percentage of Generation Z, according to this study,
Yes.
plan to be a social media influencer?
I don't. This is too stupid to respond to. What?
The answer is 27%.
Wow.
38% say there is enough work out there in social media influencing for them to become a social media influencer. 14.75% of them said that being a social media influencer is the only job for them. 20% of those were males and 13%, I was saying 20% of males, Gen Z males said that, and 13% of Gen Z females said that. That's
I don't go in for this Gen Z bashing. I mean, my livelihood is dependent on the Gen Zers that I teach, so I do not go.
I have no idea how many Gen Xers want to be social media influencers.
Yes,
it might be more.
How many boomers?
How many boomers, exactly.
Yeah.
I got no idea.
Anyway, everyone, that was a fresh stats nugget.
Very fresh.
That was not one that had been sitting in the back of the McDonald's box for 9 months.
Everything is fresh. I did wipe my document before I started this week. So it's
really?
all fresh. It is all
Wow.
fresh. That document was like 50 pages long. Like all the dregs I didn't get to.
Yeah.
Anyway.
By the way, I've got a question for
Yeah.
you, right? So at some point in the last few months, I realized, because I don't really listen to podcasts, I'd forgotten what a podcast even sounded like.
Doesn't sound like us.
Knowing that we were planning to resume at
Yeah.
some point, I thought, well, I should listen to one. So I was listening to the Chaser Report
Oh, yeah?
shortly after the Australian election. And imagine my surprise when I hear you on it.
Really?
Yes.
I've only done one since the Australian
Well, that
election.
was the one that was the
wow.
one that
Did
I
you-
heard,
did you
because
enjoy
you
it?
famously will not, and I think this is very admirable, will not go on air to analyze something unless you have researched it
Yeah,
very deeply.
totally.
You also famously are completely indifferent to Australian politics.
Exactly.
So did you have to learn all the main characters in Australian politics?
It's funny you mention that. I literally, it's true.
Yeah.
All your assumptions are correct.
Yes.
I literally watched the Sky Election channel. When I say Sky Election channel, I don't mean the main channel. I mean the one where they have the press conferences.
Oh, okay,
Where
right.
it's just constant press conferences, right?
Jesus.
I watched that for 3 weeks straight before I went on the Chaser. So as my research method. And man, that was a depressing process.
That is absolutely punishing.
It really was.
Wow.
So yeah, so I actually did know what I was talking about but
Chaz making sacrifices for knowledge.
I assure you, I have immediately forgotten everything I learned as soon as that election was over.
Good.
But okay, I want to talk about one other thing about maybe influencing polls for midterms and so
Yes,
forth
yeah.
before we talk about the comeback as evidence for the Democrats, as evidenced by the primaries.
Yes.
And we'll talk more about the primaries in a second.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the economy because that's obviously a big. I'm just going to roll through just a few highlights because
Yes.
a lot's happened. Basically, there are two major periods. Let's talk about the negatives first.
Yes.
Real GDP shrunk in both Q1 and Q2 this year.
Yep.
By 0.6% in quarter two, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. There's arguments about whether it's recession or not.
I was going to say,
technically.
doesn't that meet the technical definition of a recession?
It does, but but apparently, according to American economists, there's something involving labor data, which means it's not technically a recession.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I mean,
at the moment, there's not widespread talk of a recession being on now. There's widespread talk that it could happen. But...
no, although polling, I'm about to get to, has its own view on that. But anyway, this is Australia, and there were two negative quarters. We'd call that a recession.
Yeah, we would.
But America does not. Or at least the government does not. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Inflation's at 8.5% for the year.
Yep.
As at the end of July.
Yes.
And that's going down.
It is.
It was higher as at the end of June.
Yeah.
Although the monthly inflation in July had leveled out to zero.
Yeah.
For just July.
And I remember in the US, in my PhD program, there were a lot of people who studied the American political economy. And I remember them saying that in electoral terms, petrol prices were basically everything.
Yeah.
As far as inflation is concerned, because it is just the most consistent thing that people can actually see week after week, month after month.
And it was huge in America.
Yes. Yeah,
Like the energy inflation index was up 41% to June.
Yeah.
So-
and this is in the country which literally drives about twice as far as everybody else every year. But petrol prices are coming down now, right?
They are.
Yes.
They went from $3.13 a gallon a year ago to $5 a gallon in January.
Jesus.
And they're now back to $3.88. And they
Right.
basically haven't stopped coming down since
Yes.
January. They're still going down.
I've also been off Twitter for basically since the 2020 election, but I do just occasionally take a sneak at what is Biden trying to say on Twitter. And recently it's all been stuff about petrol prices.
Yeah.
Like, wow, have you seen how little I paid for petrol in Delaware recently?
Yeah, look, it's not too low. It's not too low, but it's coming down.
Yeah.
It's still, to put that in context, because these numbers mean nothing to Australians, presumably. In the pre-COVID Trump era, it was kind of hovering between 220 and 280 per gallon. So it's down to 380 a gallon. So it's still high, but not historically high like it was. $5 a gallon was that was super, 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 super high. But to put in context, $5 a gallon is $1.32 a litre.
Yes.
So it's not much by our standards, but as you say, they drive more.
Yeah.
And it's now about $1 a litre in our terms. But remember, that's Australian dollars versus American dollars as well. I should say that, I mean, that's a big deal. Like you say, the gas prices dropping $1.20 a gallon is a big deal. And if they keep on coming down, that is a very big deal.
Yes.
But there is a downside to that.
Yeah.
And that is the reason they're coming down is because demand is dropping. Oil demand was 9% lower in July than a year earlier.
Right, yes.
So some people are saying that's an indicator of a recession.
Could be.
Yeah, like we will see over the next few months, basically.
Yes, okay.
But you always see these things in hindsight.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly, because supply is not increasing.
No.
The attempts to get, I mean, I was deeply disappointed in the Saudi jaunt, which evidently resulted in nothing in terms of increasing oil supply. There was some like, oh yeah, we'll take that up with OPEC down the track. And releasing more of the strategic US reserve, that was always going to be a drop in the ocean, so to speak.
So it's not supply, it's demand.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like I said, gas prices going down, but inflation in July was zero for July. Now, Biden kept on going, we got zero inflation. No, 8.5% inflation is what you had, but zero for July.
Yes.
Now, if I tell you gas prices, the gasoline index fell 7.7% in July, but inflation was zero, that tells you how much more they're paying for everything else.
That's right.
And that's the problem.
Yes.
Food, in particular, like food went up 1.3% in July alone, 10.9% over the previous year. Now that is how consumers measure how they're going, how much they pay at the supermarket.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So it's still going up, right? But the gas prices are going down at the very least. So that's a kind of a mixed situation. Inflation. It's definitely not good.
No,
but it's not as bad as it was, except for food. which
that little thing.
Food. It's just mixed, as I said. Real disposable personal income has decreased because of inflation for 5 straight quarters.
Oof.
In quarter one, it decreased 7.8%. Real disposable personal income. In quarter two, much less. It decreased by 0.5%.
Yeah.
Because inflation is starting to drop. But its increase is starting to reduce.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. They're not out of the woods, but at least the red zone is not flashing quite as hard as it was.
Right, yes.
They're the big negatives. Anyway, they're the big negatives for
Yes.
America. Okay. The positives. In July, they added 528,000 jobs.
Yeah.
There's not been 9.5 million new jobs under Biden. Their unemployment rate is now 3.5%, which is as low as it ever was under Trump when he was
Yes.
constantly boasting about how
That's
wonderful
right,
it was.
yes.
For unemployment. Not so much boasting about how wonderful unemployment is now, more ignoring it.
Yes.
But yeah, 3.5% unemployment is still 3.5% unemployment.
Yeah, and I mean, that's as not under Biden's control as it was not under Trump's control. It's
totally.
actually got nothing to do with the
Yeah,
administration.
I'm not talking. Nothing that I have said is in any way a either a compliment or a criticism of the Biden administration. It's just telling you where they're at as far as elections go. Another positive, even though real income has been going down.
Yes.
Wealth, I guess this is because of some of the payouts they've been getting, has been going up. According to the Federal Reserve, after inflation, the net assets of Americans increased by nearly $2 trillion from the first quarter of 2021 to the first quarter of 2022, not including the top 1%. Because usually when you say wealth's gone up, you go, oh, yeah, it's the rich guys.
Yes, yeah.
This is not including the top 1%. From the first quarter of 2021 to the first quarter of 2022, the inflation-adjusted wealth of households in the lowest quintile of income jumped 15%.
That is very good news.
So that is good news. That's a positive. And also, just a little side, from late 2020 to early 2022, the percentage of uninsured Americans fell from 14.5% to 11.8% amongst adults, from 6.5% to 3.7% amongst children. They're the positives. So just as a little summary, that's where they're at. Okay, so overall, in terms of polling and where people think they're at after all that,
yes.
the percentage of Americans who evaluate their lives poorly enough to be considered suffering on Gallup's Life Evaluation Index was 5.6% in July, which is the highest ever since they started in 2008, including the recession.
Wow.
The percentage of adults estimated to be thriving has declined from 59% in June 2021 to 51%. So it's gone down 8% in the last year and a bit. According to NBC News poll, 21% of voters feel the nation's headed in the right direction. 74% think the opposite. 68% believe America is in a recession right now. So there we go. 50% of those polled said things will get worse economically before they get better. 26% are the opposite. And according to ABC Ipsos poll, 69% of Americans think the nation's economy is getting worse. That's this month. The highest since 2008, when it was 82%. 12% think the economy is getting better, even though it is. And 18% thinks it's essentially doing the same. 30% of Americans favour Biden's handling of the economic recovery. 29% they approve of his handling of inflation. So that's a little summary for you all.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to any of that?
No.
No? Okay. Little side. Little stats nugget. I got heaps of them. They're all fresh. So fresh, piping hot stats nugget. What percentage of unemployed workers, Mr. Dr. David Smith, receive unemployment benefits nationally? So this is not people without a job.
Yeah.
These are officially unemployed people. Okay, so people are looking for a job but can't get a job.
Right.
What percentage of them do you think receive unemployment insurance in America?
It's going to be something low.
Really? Why would you say that?
I'm going to guess 20%.
Not bad. 31%. It's a little bit high. There you go. You should feel sunny about that. The median unemployed worker
Yes.
received a weekly benefit greater than $0 in 2 states,
Wow.
Minnesota and New Jersey, during the first quarter of 2022. So just for those who aren't up on medians and mathematical terms, that's saying that over half of the unemployed workers, not people without jobs, but people who are officially unemployed, who have gone through all the paperwork and are looking for jobs, in all but 2 states, more than half of them receive 0 benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what that means. There we go. That's another depressing stats nugget for you.
Yeah, not very surprising if you're familiar with the American safety net.
Okay, but let's put the economy with abortion and all that kind of stuff all together into where the Biden administration is at. You may have something to weigh in on this one. I'll just give you the quick run of the land. A lot of summarizing going on here. So Biden approval. There's been some bad ones recently, but they're improving.
They are improving.
CNN a month ago had my favorite bad poll. Bear in mind, I've only been reading for the last month. I really took some time off there. 75% of Democratic-leaning voters, this was last month, wanted someone other than Biden to be the 2024 nominee. That was my favorite one. I love that. Anyway, but look, it's improving a little. The RC, the Real Clear Politics average, has gone from 37% approval a month ago, which is when Biden bottomed out, to 41% approval now.
Right.
538's gone from 37.5% a month ago to 41.5% approval now. Gallup, this is fresh. This is today. This came out today.
Yep.
Last month, they had 38% approval. Today, they have 44% approval.
Wow.
With independents going from, it's independents, by the way, that went up, not the Democrats. Independents went from 31% approval to 40% approval. And the reason why Gallup's interesting is because they have historical ratings. That puts Biden above Trump in 2018.
Yes.
That puts Biden above Bush 2006 at the same stage. It does not put him above Obama 2010.
Oh, really?
So he's not out of the woods.
And we know what happened then. But, okay, I think there's a significant difference there, which is Obama in 2010 was still very popular with Democrats. Biden, as you have hinted at, is not.
No, he's not.
Very popular with Democrats. So I think that is the main difference there.
And there's another difference, and that is that as time goes on, there appears to be a decoupling going on between congressional votes.
Yes.
And congressional approval and presidential approval.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because Americans are starting to hate everyone. And the best example of this, they've been doing it for a while, but now they really are. There was a Fox poll I saw the other day. Independents approve of Congress 20% to 76%, but they approve of congressional Republicans 18% to 78%.
Wow.
So when you hate people that much, it doesn't really matter. It's very easy to support one side, even if you don't support their president.
Yes.
In that case. And there's in fact what we're finding the generic ballot, which is generically talking about Democrats versus Republicans in the House, is basically even at the moment, despite Biden's terrible approval rating.
And I mean, earlier in the year, it was hugely pro-Republican.
Yes.
That generic ballot, 7%, 9%, 9% up.
Yeah.
There has been a significant tightening.
But importantly, on what Dave and I were talking about before about we're by no means predicting a Democrat win.
No, absolutely not.
The Democrats need to be 3 or 4 points up.
Yes, they absolutely
because
do.
there is both an intentional gerrymander in a number of states from Republicans and a natural gerrymander from the distribution of Democrats in seats.
Yes.
Because Democrats tend to gather in cities.
Yeah. Now, this is significant. So Nick Stephanopoulos, the American election law expert, I was at an event with him at UNSW the other day, and he was pointing out that in terms of the unnatural gerrymander, Congress is actually less gerrymandered now than it was in the previous decade. And I mean, even though the Supreme Court has basically said there's nothing that federal courts can do about gerrymandering, state Supreme Courts are actually taking a much tougher line on gerrymanders now. But it's this. Which is not to say that problem has gone away. It hasn't.
No.
There are places that should really be considered purple at this point that are basically destined to be red for a long time.
And so don't interrupt your flow, but I just have to inject at this moment that you would expect it to be less intentionally gerrymandered now than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because they haven't applied the lessons from the census yet.
Yes.
They only just got the census results. So the current seats are drawn according to census results from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Which are way out of date. So from the census results 10 years ago, they drew heavily gerrymandered seats. Over time, they become less gerrymandered because those seats are less accurately drawn.
Yes.
They're about to be very accurately drawn again. So my prediction is in 2 years' time, it will be super gerrymandered.
The example that Nick gave was, Texas, which, sure, it's a red state, but it's getting bluer and bluer. Could, it is possible that Beto O'Rourke could win the gubernatorial election there. I wouldn't give it particularly high odds. But he's saying the chances of Democrats ever winning the state house in Texas are infinitesimally remote.
Yeah.
Because of the gerrymander. Same in Florida. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's what you've called the natural gerrymander, which you could instead call the worldwide geographic phenomena of left disadvantage at elections, which is to do with the clustering of supporters of left parties, which is just it's a fact of political geography everywhere. If you're going to have single member districts, you are going to have the left at a disadvantage.
Yeah, that is true. And just for those who aren't quite following why, if you have everyone in the city being on the left, that means in those seats, the left will win 70% of the votes or 65% of the votes. So there's a lot of inverted commas wasted votes.
Yes, yeah.
And then the rural areas, they might lose by 45 to 55. And if they spread those voters out more evenly, then they would win more seats. That's what you're referring to.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But that's just where they choose to live. Because of that, by the way, I know what you think of 538, but they currently have the GOP as a 78% favourite to flip the House, even with these numbers.
Yeah.
So there we go.
That sounds right.
And just a little aside, this goes to what you were talking about before about how much things have changed in the last 6 months. According to a CNBC poll, 68% of Republicans express a high level of interest in the upcoming election, bearing in mind it's people who are very interested who vote in midterms as opposed to presidential elections, versus 66% of Democrats. So there's a 2% advantage there. But it was a 17-point advantage to the GOP in March.
Yeah, right. Yes.
And an 8-point advantage in May. So that's evening out. There is a natural process where it evens out as you get closer to an election anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not this much.
No.
That suggests
no. Something else is going on here. Yeah.
So at this point in time, we can talk about other primaries. I know there's a primary you're particularly interested in talking about.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say about where we're at in terms of momentum with either abortion or the economy or Biden administration or anything or Republicans, just in terms of like all this polling stuff? Do you have anything to add?
I just want to say one more thing,
Yeah.
which is that circumstances could easily change again against the Democrats. It's very easy to imagine like an actual agreed upon recession happening.
Oh, yeah.
It is very easy to imagine some external event happening which could put Democrats right back in the toilet. With all of that as a distinct possibility, the fact that Democratic organizations have been deliberately boosting Republican extremists because they think they're going to be easier to beat, that is an incredibly risky strategy.
Tell the listeners what you mean by
so
that.
what's been going on in a lot of places from coast to coast. I think Maryland had some of the most egregious examples. We've seen it in Pennsylvania, Michigan, California, all over the place, is Democrats run ads, often costing many times more than what Republicans themselves are spending. They run ads in Republican primaries saying such and such a candidate is too pro-life for this state, or such and such a candidate is too pro-gun for this state, is too conservative for this state. So it's ostensibly Democrats saying that they don't like this person because they're too right-wing, but what they're actually saying is Republicans vote for this person. Now, this can be effective in primary campaigns which are low information and where candidates often don't have a huge amount of money to spend. They have significantly boosted some real extremists. Democrats are taking credit for the fact that Doug Mastriano is the Pennsylvania candidate for governor. Now, at the moment, he's expected to lose, but as I said, circumstances can absolutely change. In fact, John Fetterman, his opponent, had a medical emergency, which could have completely, changed the race. And if Mastriano wins, then they get someone who says that the 2020 election was stolen as governor, who could potentially be in a position to cause all kinds of mayhem. In Michigan, Pete Meyer, one of 10 Republicans to vote for the impeachment of Trump after the January 6th riot, was defeated by a far-right extremist who was boosted by Democrats in the west of the state. And I had a lot of sympathy for Pete Meyer when he said, well, don't give me this bullshit about Democrats being the party of defending democracy. Don't give me that sanctimony. Look at what they're doing here. However tactically clever you think it is, and I think it's less tactically clever than they think it is, there's just got to be something wrong when you're knocking out one of the few Republicans who was prepared to vote for Trump's impeachment. Now, I know that the response to this from a lot of Democratic operatives is, look, we're just, we're just bringing this extremism out into the open, right? And the reality is if you vote for a moderate Republican, you're probably getting an extremist Republican anyway because the amount of pressure that will be exerted in the party. And all that we're doing is highlighting this extremism. But let's come back to the fact that there were actually 49 Republicans who voted for the Dignity of Marriage Act, right? I know that like moderate Republicans are overrated in a lot of senses, especially when people erroneously classify people like Liz Cheney as a moderate. She never was. She voted with Trump 93% of the time. But it is actually important, even if there aren't many of them left, even if they're not particularly reliable, for Democrats to actually have some of these people in Congress. So I do not agree with this strategy at all.
I completely agree with you. I find the cynicism just disturbing. I hate it. And you think they would have learned their lesson because they had exactly that attitude to Trump back in 2016.
Yes, I mean, they weren't actively promoting Trump, but there certainly was a view that, this will be great if he wins because there's no way that he can win the general election.
Totally. Like you think they would learn by now. But also, if you have any kind of actual standards whatsoever, you should stick to those standards. Yeah. If like Pete Meyer said, if you actually care about democracy, well, that's a standard.
Yeah.
You can. It doesn't matter if they vote with Trump 100% of the time. Like they can be conservative.
Yeah.
It's a case of do they believe in democracy or not. If you care about that, then you should support them.
Yes.
Like when they're up against someone who's
who doesn't.
Who doesn't. Yeah. So I agree with you. I'm glad you brought that up. I was just going to say when you're saying anything could happen, it'd be so easy for some of these people to win. The point I was going to make is, when the Q3 economic growth results come out? The week before the election.
Yeah.
That's going to be a huge deal. Like that may be the moment, even by American standards, they plummet into recession.
Yeah.
The week before the election.
Yeah.
So and also, let me tell you, 528,000 jobs created last month. I've been following job reports enough to know what that means is next month is going to be jack shit jobs created.
Yeah.
Because they always even out. So what the economy giveth, the economy taketh away as well.
Yes. Very biblical.
Yes. But anyway, tell us more about these extremists today, because I know there's one you want to talk about. Primaries.
Oh, yes. Yes. Goodbye and good riddance, Karl Palladino.
Yes. Tell me about him.
So Karl Palladino is 81 years old.
Yeah.
But was in a primary in Western New York for a district that begins, I believe, just to the west of Buffalo. And it stretches west quite a long way. So Karl Palladino gained quite a bit of notoriety just after Trump got elected.
He was even before Trump. He was OG Trump.
Oh, yeah, he was. He was a major ally of Trump.
He's been doing that garbage for at least 10 years.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of when the country became aware was when, I think this was after Trump got elected, but before he'd actually become president. Palladino made a remark about Michelle Obama, which I'm not going to repeat, which was
I've got it right
no, I don't want you to read it. It was so racist that Trump said that was really wrong of Karl to say that.
Yeah.
Right? Just let that marinate for a sec.
A lot of people call things racist when, in my view, they're not necessarily racist. This, whoa, racist.
Yes. Yeah. When you've got Trump saying, Okay, so he had some party chairman role or something. I kind of assumed we'd never hear from him again, but no. Not only was he running, he got the endorsement of Elise Stefanik.
Yes.
Now, so Elise Stefanik, who came into Congress in 2014, at the age of 30, she was the youngest Republican in the House. She was, at that point, the youngest woman to be elected to the House. And she had originally branded herself as a moderate, but from about 2016 onwards became increasingly Trump aligned, to the fact that she is now just fully on board with stolen election garbage. She replaced Liz Cheney as the Republican number 3 in the House, and she endorsed Palladino. She endorsed Palladino despite the fact that last year Palladino told a radio interviewer that, quote, America needed more leaders like Hitler.
Yeah. Let me read you that quote, because I've got that one.
Yes.
Because it's good to get the full context here. He told local newspaper Art Voice.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that's the Obama one. No, here we go.
Yeah.
How do you get his quote? How do you get people thinking about the possibility of change here in New York State and what that might mean for everyone here? I was thinking the other day about somebody had mentioned on the radio Adolf Hitler and how he aroused the crowds and how he would get up there screaming these epithets, and these people were hypnotized by him. I guess that's the kind of leader we need today. We need somebody inspirational. We need somebody there's a doer, has been there and done it. Now, to be fair, he wasn't saying we need Laban's around, but you'd think that he would have known better than to put that forward.
Yeah, if you want an inspirational speaker, there are other examples you can go to. Other than I think that quote reveals a considerable sympathy with Hitler himself.
It's
from Palladino, and anyway, he. Said that the Buffalo shooting was a false flag.
Yep. He forwarded videos saying that.
Yeah. Pretty standard kind of stuff at this point. I was actually kind of surprised when he lost, to be honest, given how some of the primaries have been going, and given also, so he was up against a very establishment figure. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but he's going to Congress. So anyway, it was, and I would hope that at the age of 81 he just disappears.
I should just explain, by the way, the reason Stefanik endorsed him, and that was because Stefanik has basically spent the last 3 years or 2 years running away from her original reputation of moderation.
Yes.
When she first got in, she was supposed to be a new Republican.
Yes.
Like the new breed or moderate female, whatever. And then it was pretty obvious which way the winds were blowing.
Yeah.
After about a year of her being that new breed, and she thought, no, I'm going to stop being the new breed. I'm going to start being the old breed.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, she's been going way over the top, trying to convince everyone that she is as much of a troglodyte as possible, because she wants to run for Kevin McCarthy's job. She wants to be the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
And so she's going as hard as she possibly can in the Trumpy direction to try, and she's not convincing anyone, unfortunately for her, but she keeps on trying. So that's what's going on there.
Yes, yeah. That's what leads you to endorsing someone who says that America needs more public speakers like Hitler.
Yes. By the way, were you across Scott Esk, the Oklahoma guy?
No.
He's another guy who lost. He did win 42% of the vote. This is in the Oklahoma. He's running for the Oklahoma House of Reps. I'm going to read you this. I'm going to read you a quote from an article because it's just wonderful. In 2013, Esk was commenting in a Facebook conversation about the Pope saying he couldn't judge gay people. Esk posted some Bible quotations, including the part of Romans 1 where the Bible says that a long list of people who sinned is worthy of death. Another person asked him, so just be clear, you think we should execute homosexuals, presumably by stoning? Esk responded, I think we would be totally in the right to do it. Ignoring as a nation things that are worthy of death is very remiss. A year later, this was back in 2013, a year later, a journalist asked him about those comments.
Yes.
And he said, you'd think he'd now backtrack. He said, what I will tell you right now is that was done in the Old Testament under a law that came directly from God. And in time it was totally just came directly from God. And then he put out a video after that where he claimed that he set the record straight.
Yeah.
Saying that he has compassion, quote, compassion on anybody in the grips of an insidious addiction such as homosexuality.
Oh, God.
Then this year, in 2022, Esk called, when a local TV news report wrote about those comments, he said it was a hit piece on the fact that I had an opinion against homosexuality. And his quote was, well, does that make me a homophobe? Maybe some people think it does. But as far as I and many of the people, the voters of House District 87 are concerned, it simply makes me a Christian. Christians believe in biblical morality, kind of by definition, or they should. So he had many opportunities to walk it back.
Yes.
And he's taken none of them. But he ended up losing. So they sometimes lose.
Who did he lose to?
Another Republican. This
Okay,
was
of course. Yeah.
There was a primary. So there you go. So anyway, do you want to? We've got probably about 25 minutes here. I want to talk about the student loan thing.
Yes.
But do you want to quickly talk about the ranked choice thing before we go on?
Yes.
Yeah.
So ranked choice voting is marching across America, and its latest conquest is Alaska. So Alaska has just become the second state to implement ranked choice voting at the state level, although will also be used in federal elections that are held on a statewide basis. So the first state to do this was Maine.
Yeah.
And so Maine, they had a referendum in 26, or they had a ballot measure in 2016 that introduced ranked choice voting. The voters have confirmed it again twice since then, because it's been, first of all, the state legislature overturned it, and then they had what's known as the people's veto, which is where you get enough signatures. I think it was 80,000, which is a lot in a state the size of Maine. That put a stop to that, and then in that same year, in 2018, there was another ballot measure where it was reaffirmed. So it's clearly pretty popular in Maine. And I asked my friend Tyler DeVos, who lives in Portland, Maine. I don't think he's any relation to the Michigan DeVos clan, although Tyler did live in Michigan. But I asked him about ranked choice voting and how it was going in Maine. So big thanks to Tyler, and shout out for getting back to me about this. He says that it's been very successful. He made a really interesting and important point about why did ranked choice voting come into being in Maine. Do you know this story?
This is because their wacky governor.
Yes.
They didn't get a majority twice.
Yes.
There was a three-way
Yes.
race.
So Maine has a lot of independents,
Yeah.
both in terms of voters and candidates. I mean, one of their senators is an independent, Angus King. And so Paul LePage never got more than 42% of the vote, but kept getting re-elected. And he was the worst governor in America. Given that Joe Arpaio never got elected governor in Arizona, Paul LePage was the worst. Paul LePage, he called himself Trump before Trump, and he absolutely, he was like a combination of Trump, Carl Palladino, and Joe Arpaio. You put them all together, and you've got Paul LePage. So that was why they introduced ranked choice voting. And I haven't.
He was against it, I believe.
Oh, he was completely against it. And Republicans who have lost in Maine have been against it. And Paul LePage is against it now as he's running again. So. We can, I'm sure, expect continuous legal challenges. But given the number of times that voters have reaffirmed it, it does seem to be there to stay. One sincere concern that people often put forward about ranked choice voting.
When you say ranked choice, you mean preferential?
Yeah, preferential.
Our system.
Voters. So just to explain it, because it's not quite our system. So just to explain it a little bit more. In most states in the US, Maine being a good example, they had what is known as the first past the post system. First past the post is a complete misnomer because there is no post to get past. It's whoever gets the most votes wins the election, which you can do it with 42%. Now, some states they need someone to get more than 50%, so they have runoff elections instead, where the top two candidates, if no one gets 50%. So preferential voting in the US is often referred to as instant runoff, right? So the idea is people list preferences, although they don't have to list preferences. This is not Australia, where we have compulsory preferential voting. And so the top two candidates are determined, and then they redistribute the preferences. Some people argue that this is confusing. There was a study done by an MIT researcher who said people take 12 seconds longer to fill out the ballots when they're doing this. But he also, more seriously, he said that that people trust the electoral system less, although this is very much a sort of pilot study. And he also did say that it had the intended effect of people are more likely to vote for independents and minor parties, which in a state like Maine is what people want. That's why they introduced it there in the first place. And this is one of the major benefits of ranked choice voting, is that people don't feel that they're throwing their voice away on an independent or a minor party. So I think it's a good thing. I think, though, to really make it work, compulsory preferential voting is what really makes it work. But obviously, you're not going to get that in a country that doesn't have compulsory voting. Now, so it's just been tried in Alaska. The confusing thing about Alaska was not the ranked choice voting itself. It was the fact that they were having a special election at the same time as they were having a primary with all of the same candidates.
Oh, God.
And the special election was done with ranked choice voting and the primary was done without ranked choice voting. But the actual election in November is just going to be a rerun of this special election with the exact same candidates, except for one of the Republicans who's dropped out, but with ranked choice voting. So it's going to be this really bizarre experiment where people are going to get to see the effects of the ranked choice voting that they did in August, and then they're going to sort of redo it in November. It's actually going to be fascinating to see how that changes people's strategic choices, because what happened in this special election, so the top three candidates were a Democrat, Mary Petolta, I think her name is. There was Sarah Palin, former governor, former vice presidential candidate, and a very establishment Republican called Nick Begich, not related to the establishment Democrat from Alaska, Mike Begich. And what has happened is that Petolta has ended up on top. She's ended up with 38% of the vote. So obviously way below 50%, but the Republican vote has been split. Sarah Palin is on about 30.5% and Begich is on about 28.5%.
Sure. So you expect Sarah Palin's votes to go to...
Well, this is the thing. If this was Australia, if this was a compulsory preferential system, you'd think, oh, well, Palin's going to get home easily from Begich's preferences. But we've got no idea how many people actually listed second preferences in this election.
Yeah, gotcha.
It might not. So she needs a 7.5% boost from Begich. So she needs about a quarter of Begich's voters to have second preferenced her without any offset from second preferencing Petolta, which could have happened. I do find it conceivable. There are a lot of Republicans in Alaska who are pissed off with Sarah Palin, who conceivably could have given Petolta a second preference, but we're talking low single digits there.
Okay.
So we actually don't know what's going. We're in uncharted territory here, appropriately in Alaska, because this is the first time it's been done. So we don't know how many people are going to list second choices. Whereas in Australia, the preference flows are reasonably easy to predict, not entirely easy, but reasonably easy to predict. They're going to be very hard to predict in places where it's never been done before and where you don't actually need to list a second preference.
Well, hopefully, given this is Alaska where they use mooses as voting booths, they have a final result before November, because sometimes it takes months and months.
It is going to take a while.
Yeah.
Alaska politics, by the way, is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's one of these states where, so this is for a House seat, but it's one of these states along with Wyoming and Delaware and Vermont, where there are more Senate seats than House seats.
Yes, of course.
And because, the House is where all budget measures originate, being a House member from Alaska, that's like a way more plum job than a House member from, or Wyoming, as Liz Cheney was, than, say, being a House member from California or New York, because of the amount of pork you can be personally responsible for. And, I mean, Don Young, who it was his death has occasioned this election, he was the king of pork.
He was.
Like, the only person in America who rivaled him in terms of pork was the Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens. Alaska is it's an absolutely fascinating place, and I promise we will revisit Alaska.
We will keep on following up on that.
Yes.
Now,
shout out to any Alaskans listening. I believe we have had an actual Australian listener in Alaska.
We will get them back on
in the
sure.
past. Yes.
So, what time is it? It's policy time. What time is it? It's policy time.
New bit.
No, policy time sting.
We used to
Don't you
do
remember
this?
the policy? Yeah, we used to do this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess you didn't know because you couldn't hear it.
Okay.
If you ever listen to our podcast, you'd have heard the sting all the time.
Been a long time. Yeah,
it's very popular. Very popular sting. Very popular segment. Everyone loves policy time. I'm going to race through this. You jump in whenever you want because I know you got plenty of opinions about the student debt thing.
Yeah.
But I'm going to race through it just because of the time.
Yes.
Okay. I've split this up. I've actually quite organised this quite well.
Yeah.
It's policy time. It's my favourite segment. What's the problem? The problem is 45 million people owe a combined $1.6 trillion in federal student debt.
That's a problem in anyone's terms.
That is a problem. Now, to be fair, about 30% of undergrads graduate with zero debt.
Yep.
And 54% of those with a debt
Yes.
owe less than $20,000.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not everyone who's got the problem, right? In fact, when we talk about the problem, undergraduate loans are actually capped at $31,000.
Yes.
So usually when you talk about the people with $1 million debts, which do exist, $1 million
they
debts.
absolutely do.
You're talking about graduates. You're talking about graduate loans.
Law, especially the law degrees.
Law,
yes.
and dentistry and stuff like
yeah.
that. Right. The half of college debt in total is held by a quarter of borrowers, those who are going to graduate school.
Yes.
Okay, but that's the situation. Now, but 6% of graduates owe more than $100,000.
Yes.
Right? There's your problem area. And the other thing is, which is not talked about so much, is a stubbornly high number of people never pay off their loans, but they're very small. And I'll get to them in a second.
The loans are very small, not the people are
No,
very small.
it's not like Gulliver's Travels.
yeah.
The Lilliputians.
Lilliputians.
It's not like that.
Fuck you, I'm not paying this back.
No. It's the loans are small, but they never pay them off.
Yeah.
And those small loans cripple those people for life.
Yep.
We will get to them in a second. Okay, so that's the problem. What's the policy that we're talking about? Even before this, Biden was doing something about student debt, which was the Department of Education erased about $9.5 billion of student debt last year, owed by about 563,000 borrowers who either attended for-profit schools that were shyster or were disabled.
Yes.
Not the schools, the borrowers.
Yeah.
No complaints there from anyone, even from Republicans. I don't think anyone's complaining about that.
No.
Okay, but what happened yesterday was he announced a cancellation of up to $10,000 in student loan debt per borrower to individuals who earn less than $125,000 a year now.
Yes.
Their current income is $125,000 a year or less. $20,000 per borrower can be forgiven if you paid for college using Pell Grants.
Yes.
Which is like poor people scholarship in America.
Yep.
They've also, and this is not talked about as much, extended the pause on federal student loan repayments to January 2023.
That's right,
Because
yes.
during COVID, it was actually under Trump that they paused student loan repayments. And
Trump extended the pause twice.
Yeah.
Biden's extended it 5 times.
Yeah, and there's extended
So
again.
it's actually a fairly bipartisan pandemic measure.
Yes, it's been going for about 2 years now, 2.5 years. Borrowers with undergraduate loans can cap your repayment when the repayments recommence at 5% of monthly income. It used to be 10% of monthly income. So that's going to reduce the standard payment by $250 a month.
Yes.
That's not being talked about much at all.
No.
But that is there. And to me, that's actually the best reform of
It
all.
is.
I think that's a great reform. Because there's no rush to pay them off. You just don't want to cripple people's ability to function in society. And it costs about $300 billion over the next decade if the reforms end there, which they probably won't. We're going to get to that in a second. Sorry, jump in.
Yeah, look, even though you said student loans are capped at $31,000, they still accrue interest.
They do.
Yeah, that's another huge part of the problem. If you're accruing 7% interest a year, you do get people who end up paying back, if it takes them a long time, so much more than they ever borrowed in the first place.
That's absolutely true. And there have been at various times attempts to forgive loans which are 30 years old or 40 years old or whatever. I think pretty much no one gets to the age of 55 or 60 with a massive debt, but you can screw up your life pretty badly before then.
Yeah. I mean, you've now mentioned quite a lot of instances of student loan forgiveness. It's worth mentioning that the pandemic has been a golden age of loan forgiveness, right? There have been all kinds of businesses that have had loans forgiven during the pandemic. It's not like some completely out of the ordinary thing. And even before the pandemic, there's always been loan forgiveness for purposes of, alleviating hardship or political expediency.
Yeah. According to the White House, 90% of Biden's debt relief is going to those who earn less than $75,000 a year, and 20 million people will have their debt completely cancelled.
Yes.
Lots of dispute over those numbers, though.
Yes.
So, like every two-bit think tank has their own numbers, and they all contradict each other.
Every two-bit think tank.
So I've learned to distrust those numbers because they're just everyone's got different numbers.
Yes.
Insta polling on this. So that's what's been proposed.
Yes.
Morning Consult back in April had 64% of people supporting student loan forgiveness. So a recent CNBC poll had 66% in favour, 32% in favour of student debt cancellation for all borrowers, 34% say cancelling for only those in need.
Yeah.
Also, only 30% said that no student debt cancellation should occur. Only 19% of adults between 18 and 34 years maintain such a position.
Yes.
Surprisingly, 59% of Americans are concerned that student loan forgiveness will make inflation worse, which inflation is obviously the key issue at the moment.
Yeah.
So let's get into these arguments. To and fro, the pro and con arguments, and you can jump in anytime you want, okay?
Yeah.
I'll just rail through them. Number one, the inflationary argument is the one that gets made a lot. The argument is they just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which really didn't reduce inflation all that much, but it did reduce the deficit by $300 billion over 10 years, which was supposed to make a small impact on inflation. There's a lot of budget trickery, by the way.
Yes.
There's a 10-year bill where the major cost was Obamacare subsidies, and they only count 3 years of subsidies.
Yes.
So there's a lot of bullshit going on there. But for whatever, and also I think 93% of the savings were in the last 5 years of the 10-year bill.
Yeah.
Having said that, they took the 10 years of savings under that bill and they disappeared it all in one stroke of the pen. This got $300 billion. So they go, oh, look at that. This is in a time of high inflation. It's going to make it more inflationary. Now, spoiler, I think this argument is bullshit. I'll tell you why in a second, but do you have anything to add about that argument?
Look, I don't say this very often, but I agree with Goldman Sachs, who said it was bullshit. When Goldman Sachs is calling this will make inflation bad argument bullshit, you know it's bullshit.
Yeah, it is. It is. And in fact, even more than Goldman Sachs, I mean, it's good to cite them, but I'll raise you Goldman Sachs with Penn Wharton, which are the right wingers' favorite institution when it comes to budget numbers.
Yeah.
And in fact, they're the ones who have, when I said everyone's got their own numbers, they've got the nastiest numbers for this particular bill. And they told the New York Times it would add perhaps 1/10% to the inflation rate.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Which,
when the inflation rate's 8.5%, that's not a huge amount.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's just worth mentioning why this is the case. It's like, it's because proportionate to the whole American economy, we're actually talking about fairly small numbers.
Yes.
They are numbers that are going to be very significant for the people who are receiving
20 million out of 350 million.
Yeah. But we're not talking about the kind of pandemic measures of direct cash transfers to people. Yeah. The second thing is that they are actually going to restart payment of loans. That would offset any kind of inflation.
Well, I was going to say, no one's been paying loans for 2 years.
Yes,
So it's not less payment.
No,
because payment at the moment is zero.
Yes.
when they eventually restart repayment, it's going to be more payment.
Yes.
So it can't be inflationary.
It absolutely
compared to the
cannot.
last 2 years.
No,
because they're staying at zero. And also the other thing is these benefits, they're not just bang like that.
No.
They're spread out over the life of the loan because you have less interest payments and all the rest of it. Like I've seen estimates from economists that suggest it's only going to have about a $13 billion impact a year.
Yeah.
Which is 0.08% of total personal consumption. So so I think there's a lot of overestimate of the effect this will have on inflation personally. And listen to Goldman Sachs. So I think that's a bullshit argument, which is why I've got it right at the top. Okay, the next argument that you hear is unfair to people who paid their loans off already. People who worked very hard. Yeah. They paid their loans off and they made sacrifices that other people did not. And then now those people get their loans paid off for them. What do you have to say about that?
I think that for most people who are struggling to pay off student loans, it is actually because of circumstances beyond their control. And when you especially look at the size of the cohort that walked out of college into the worst job market ever after the GFC. And we have to remember how long that recovery actually took. And then wages then didn't recover for another 10 years. There has been a lot of stuff way beyond people's control in this. Now, obviously there are people who, who didn't pay it for all kinds of other reasons, and bad judgment and personal irresponsibility comes into this. But if we're looking at the difference between people who paid their loans and people who didn't pay their loans, I suspect that virtue is not the major discriminating factor in there. That is my that's my general sense.
I would say every government policy has winners and losers.
Yeah.
And so yeah, sure, there can be some people who were bludgers who get a break here. And there'll be some people who work really, really hard and that didn't get a benefit from it. But I'm not sure I care. Tough shit. That's how government works.
Yes.
Sometimes every policy has people who unfairly benefit and unfairly don't benefit. That's just how it is.
That is true. There's no such thing as pure technocratic problem-solving government. Always winners and losers.
It's just a question. Is the result a good result for the country? Is the only question I have. So that related to this, by the way, is the talking point that it'll encourage people to take out bigger loans in the future and not pay them off because they'll be expecting more forgiveness. And to that, I say, look, I think that's a more reasonable concern. That I think that actually is a logical thing, position to take. Because I suspect there will be a second round. They keep on emphasizing if that's where they stop. Because I don't think they are going to stop. I think once you've done it once, there will be a push to do it again. But I think it's much more of an issue the second bite round rather than the first bite. Personally. But once again, anyway, I think the whole sector needs reform, which is a whole different issue.
Yes.
The next talking point is that this will lead to higher fees because if the government bails out bad loans, the universities are left off the hook for their ridiculous fees.
Yeah.
And then they're going to charge more, creating bigger problems in the future. Now, I think it's probably true to a certain extent that this does let the universities off the hook and there is no disincentive for them charging high fees.
Yeah.
But it hasn't stopped them having huge education inflation to date.
No, it really hasn't. There are other very big problems going on there. And we don't really have time to get into them now. But there's been a real arms race in American universities that has translated into an arms race around fees, and
I think the system needs to be reformed generally. I don't know the best way to do it. I have a few suggestions, but I think that I'm not going to suggest it will solve all the problems because there are some big problems. A talking point from the left is saying Biden's not doing enough.
Yeah.
Nina Turner, I love this quote. Cancelling $10,000 in student debt when the average white borrower is $12,000 in debt while black women hold on average over $52,000 isn't just unacceptable. It's structural racism, she says. I think it's pushing it a bit far to accuse the Biden administration of racism, even structural racism, with this particular policy. But the argument, I'm not sure I believe her numbers, but I think the argument is correct.
Yes.
That black people and Hispanic people in particular have bigger loans than white people for two reasons. Number one, they can't afford to pay off any of the they don't have the income to pay off any of their uni fees early on. And secondly, they end up in a debt cycle and as you say, they end up actually having to pay more. I've got a stat on that. In fact, 75% of black borrowers have current loan balances greater than the original loans.
Yeah.
Compared with 50% of white borrowers.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I think there's definite. I'm not accusing Biden of structural racism, but there is a definite structural racism problem which this is not addressing.
Yeah,
that is how I would rephrase Nina Turner's.
I think that's fair, and I agree. And I think that once again, this is why you need to reform the sector. Personally, by the way, I think they should reduce the amount of time you can have a debt hanging over someone's head. Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start.
Yes.
Or possibly, I'm going to go around out of time.
Oh, can I add a book to the reading list?
Please.
David Graeber's Debt, The First 5,000 Years.
Dave Graeber?
Graeber.
Graeber.
Graeber. David Graeber, the great recently passed anthropologist. Yes.
That will be, if you want to see the book list, it will be in the comment that we put at the top of the Facebook page and the YouTube.
Maybe we should start the book list again.
No, there were good books before. Yeah. Keep them. I'll put a little line saying this is new.
Okay.
This is the big argument being used by Republicans. I'm going to race through this one. Expressed most unfairly by Marsha Blackburn. I'll just read you her quote.
Oh, God.
President Biden's decision to waive student loan debt will increase inflation, and is another gift to the rich. Tennesseans should not be forced to pay for coastal elites to get their PhD in gender studies. Okay, so forgetting Marsha Blackburn.
You rang every bell with that one.
The argument is, by the way, it's not coastal elites who owe the most, it's Georgia.
Yes.
Maryland and Georgia are the ones that 43,000, 42,000 average debts per borrower. As a little aside, maybe because there's a lot of black people and Hispanic people there.
Yeah.
In particular, black people. But anyway, the argument is to to make the argument a little bit more fairly is the old truck drivers and people who work at McDonald's shouldn't be paying for the fees of people who are going to earn more money than them in the future. Likely,
Yes.
I mean, like 1/3 of student debt is owed by the wealthiest 20% of households, while only 8% is owed by the bottom 20% of households. And I was just going to say, even if they're not richer now, they're likely to be in the future.
Well,
because the average worker with a bachelor's degree ends up making, on average, $1 million more in their careers.
This was the argument that Tim Ryan made in Ohio in a far more reasonable way than Marshall Blackburn. He said people are already on a trajectory into the middle class. Yes.
And also, I should add, graduate degree holders earn $2 to $3 million more over their lifetime than people with a high school diploma. Go on, what are you about to say?
Yeah. So, and it's nitpicking, but generally people don't actually accumulate student loans with PhDs. But anyway, yes. So there is a more reasonable version of that argument, which we've heard from people like Tim Ryan, and it is basically, the majority of Americans don't have degrees, and this is not doing anything for them. Yeah. And given the way that...
And in fact, they're subsidising the people with degrees.
Yes.
They're paying tax.
Yeah. And I think that the White House realises the power of this argument. And so they've made basically the best argument which you can make against it, which is this will actually encourage people in the future to get college degrees.
And they've got the income cap of $125,000, even though, let's face it, a 30-year-old fresh out of college is not going to be earning $125,000, even if they in the future will be very rich.
But these points, and it's telling that Tim Ryan is making this point because of the way that class has increasingly become defined in America in terms of college degrees.
Yes.
Now, class is actually a far more complicated thing than that. There are a lot of ways of looking at it, but it has become the established shorthand that if you have a college degree, you're middle class, and if you don't have a college degree, you're working class. Now, the reality is far more messy and complicated than that. But this has become the really popular shorthand because of the fact that it dovetails with Trump-era politics. That, Trump got all of these non-college educated votes. The Republican Party is trying to rebrand itself as a working class party. Tim Ryan is running against J.D. Vance, who has his campaign can be summarized by his new catchphrase, culture warfare is class warfare, right? So and this is actually something that's been going on for a long time. Thomas Frank wrote about it in 2004 in What's the Matter with Kansas, which is basically an attempt, a fairly successful attempt on the right to redefine class entirely in terms of cultural politics, right? So this is really nasty, the way that all of this stuff, this very sort of simplified understanding of class dovetails with current political cleavages in the United States to the benefits of Republicans. And this is something that Democrats have to be politically aware of when they're pushing legislation like this. Now, the flip side of this is that college-educated Republicans are an increasingly important constituency for Democrats.
Yeah.
And the cynic in me would say that this is perfectly aimed at a couple of Democratic constituencies. One is, and I think it should be aimed at, minority groups who have far more trouble paying back college loans, which goes to this deeper problem that we've been talking about of, class mobility, even when it happens among non-white people in America. It doesn't happen in the same way that it happens for white people because you don't have intergenerational wealth transfer, which is a hugely important thing. So that's one constituency, but this other constituency is college-educated Republicans who don't want to vote for Trump or don't want to vote for a Trumpified party. I think that this is aimed at them as well.
I was just going to say on this argument that the Tim Ryan argument rather than Marshall Blackburn argument, I think that there is that's an argument I have sympathy for.
Yes,
I think there's certainly a truth to that.
Yes, yeah.
But I think what it ignores is not everyone who gets a college degree is headed for success.
Yes.
In fact, there is a very large slice of people who get college degrees who are not headed for success, and those people are the people who don't get the degrees.
That's right. Absolutely.
And they are a bigger slice than you think.
Yes.
More than 1/3 of college enrollees never receive their diplomas.
Yes, when you think about the fact that in any given year in the United States, there are 20 million people enrolled in college.
Yeah.
Yes, huge numbers of people don't get their degrees for all kinds of reasons.
And if you don't get your degree, you got no benefits.
No.
At all. Right? And
by the way, these aren't all the Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gateses of the world.
No.
Yeah.
But you still have the debt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And their default rate is triple what it is for people with college degrees. They're the people who have the $5,000 debt that never gets paid off.
Yeah.
Because when you talk to the people from McDonald's paying for the lawyers' fees, they're the people at McDonald's.
Yes.
But they also have a debt that they're never going to pay off.
That's very true.
So they're the ones I have the most sympathy for, and those people are actually the way this policy of Biden does target the poor by only offering $10,000.
Yeah,
$10,000 is not worth much to someone doing a gender studies postgraduate degree because they owe a lot more than that. $10,000 is worth everything to someone who dropped out and has a $6,000 debt they can't pay off. So the $10,000 bit, I think, actually critically targets the people who need the help the most. I think, in my view.
Yeah.
And I think and so I think it's okay to have some collateral damage, so to speak, political damage in terms of people who don't deserve it getting it. If you're targeting these people who really do need help, even compared to the people who never went to college.
Yes.
So I think that's an important point to make. Now, there's also the argument made by Larry Summers that every dollar spent on student loan relief is a dollar that could have gone to support those who don't get the opportunity to go to college.
I stopped listening to Larry Summers about 20 years ago, and I have been the richer for it.
Look, I mean, I think what he's saying is true by definition. Like every dollar could be spent on something else.
Yeah.
But like that. It just depends what your priorities are, I guess. So I'm just going to leave that there, just putting the argument. I'm going to tell you what I'm most bothered by, because I am very bothered by something. You'll be able to guess what it is because you know me well enough. I'm bothered by the legals. And I'm going to say, I'm going to say very quickly.
Of course you are.
Now, the Department of Education last year said that it does not have the statutory authority to provide blanket or mass cancellation, compromise, discharge, or forgiveness of student loan principal balances and or to materially modify the repayment amounts of terms thereof. Most cut-through example of this, though, is Nancy Pelosi, who said this.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. The President can't do it. So that's not even a discussion. Not everybody realizes that, but the President can only postpone, delay, but not forgive.
A year ago, and now she's tweeting, President's bold action is a strong step in Democrats' fight to expand access to higher education by delivering historic targeted student debt relief to millions of borrowers, more working families to be able to meet their kitchen table needs as they recover from the pandemic. Okay.
That was a single tweet?
That was.
That must have really stretched the character limit.
I'm sure she wrote it herself. So how did they do it? How did they justify it? They put out a memo. Allow me to quote the memo.
Yes.
The HEROES Act, first enacted in the wake of the September 11 attacks, provides the Secretary broad authority to grant relief from student loan requirements during specific periods, a war, other military operation, or national emergency, and for specific purposes, including to address the financial harms of such a war, other military operation, or emergency. What's the emergency? It's the, quote, the present COVID-19 pandemic. Now that is fucking bullshit. There's absolutely no way they are doing this because of COVID-19.
No, that's true.
The administration got up in court 3 months ago and argued that they should drop emergency restrictions on people on the border. Title 42. Remember how they were deporting people on Title 42?
Yes.
They got up and argued in court that Title 42 should no longer exist because there is no more COVID emergency. And now they're saying this emergency is why we need to do this. Now, the abuse of emergency powers for me is becoming a massive issue. Trump did it with the border wall, which gave me the shits as you recall.
As I definitely recall.
This is an even worse example as far as going. That but the more you bypass Congress by abusing emergency powers, the more America begins to resemble a presidential dictatorship, in my view. And I think it's only going to get worse. President DeSantis is going to go way further with emergency powers. He's going to, you know it.
Yes.
And so for me, I think that this is a real problem. Congress should do this. And yes, I know Joe Manchin would never vote for it, but if you only have 49 votes, tough shit. That's how democracy works. All right, like it really pisses me off that people try and get around democracy by abusing emergency powers. And because you could get this through reconciliation if you had 50 votes,
You could.
but they don't have 50 votes in the Senate. I'm talking about here.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
all right. So this I should say, by the way, the Supreme Court as well overturned the eviction moratorium using the same stupid logic. They tried it, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's bullshit. It's not an emergency. So will the Supreme Court overturn this? It depends if it goes to court, because who's going to have standing to take this to court? Someone needs to be directly hurt by this to take it to court in the first place. Otherwise, you don't have legal standing.
Yeah.
I don't know who's directly hurt by some people having their loans forgiven.
Yeah.
Like, because the people who are putting out the loans are getting them paid off. So who is directly hurt?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they'll try and find someone. But I suppose the argument is, are they trying to get it overturned? Are they trying to get the political benefits of the policy, but get it? Because Biden clearly never liked this. Otherwise, they would have done this ages ago.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's conspiracy theory. Anyway, but that's my major problem. The legals of it, I think, is terrible. I'm ambiguous about the actual policy. I think they're good things, as I went into detail for.
Yep.
But I am sympathetic to some of the arguments, but it's just the legals that bother me. So anyway, do you have anything more to say about this? But
No.
I should say, by the way, the politics, they must be okay. Otherwise, Biden wouldn't have done it, because Biden clearly doesn't like this, but he's done it.
Yeah.
So the
I don't
politics
think-
must be all right.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to have much of an effect either way.
Oh, one more stat for you. 51% of Hispanic students have borrowed money to help pay for college. And of that number, roughly half will have their entire outstanding balance wiped away by the plan. So that goes to what you were saying before.
Yes.
About targeting them.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything else to say, or that's it?
I have nothing else to say.
I could go into detail about some of my solutions for the student guide, but you don't want to hear it, and we're out of time. So,
All right.
thank you very much, guys.
Have a good weekend,
We're going to be
Peppers.
back in another week for the next 3 months with a lot more pet. Next time, I'm doing teasers now. How's this for
You're
development?
doing teasers.
Next
Wow.
time, we're talking all about Trump. We're talking raids. We're talking DeSantis. We're talking all that kind of stuff. We're talking
Yes.
January 6th. We're
Yeah.
talking, there's been a lot of Trump news.
There has been a lot of Trump.
So we'll go through that in the next one. I'll see you guys there.
See ya.
Bye.